You just heard Raped by the Light of Christ. The live version from Purgatory Unleashed, 2010 live record that Gates put out for their reunion tour, recorded in the Wacken Festival in Germany, I believe. This Recommendal Podcast, At the Gates Part 2. I'm Mark.
I'm Jason. And I always have fond memories of Raped by the Light of Christ, as I've often said, that this is... it was like I was in high school when I saw At the Gates for the first time, and I went with Chris. Mark wasn't there because I think you were out in Philly at the time, working at Relapse.
Probably, yeah.
Because it was July of 97? No, July of 96.
Probably 96. I was there in 96, yeah.
July of 96, yeah, because it was summer before going to my senior year of high school. And
actually, I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, not quite Philly.
Relapse, before they were the juggernauts they are now. We were in a bottom part of a Christmas decoration store.
Nice.
Yeah.
The good old days.
Yeah.
The good old days. And, we went and saw these guys. It was a 4th of July thing. They were opening for Napalm Death, and we got to, go on the tour bus with those guys, and actually went to Wendy's.
Curse to Tour,
yeah. Right. And went to Wendy's with Martin Larson in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was pretty cool.
Was that at the Reptile House?
That was at the Reptile House,
wow.
Yeah. I have that framed Reptile House poster that the guy signed for me, which is pretty nifty. And the one song, and this is, again, speaking of how in part 1, Mark and I talked about how obscure With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness was. I still didn't have a copy of this. And so they got up there and they said, this next one goes out to Chris and the Requiem guys, for coming out and blah, blah. This is Raped by the Light of Christ. And I just remember thinking to myself, I don't know this song, and dedicating it to me, and it kind of felt like sadly empty in a way. But then they also dedicated World of Lies to us, which is cool, and I did know that song. But it kind of gave me the impetus to like want to find out what this song was, and turns out it's a fucking badass song, and one of probably the best songs that they ever wrote. Such a fierce song for 3 minutes. I mean, there's just like there's a lot happening in 3 minutes, and it almost sets up the new template, and that's kind of why I chose it to open up part 2, because it really sets up that punchy new style template that At the Gates is going to do, where they're able to achieve a lot of songwriting in like 2.5-3 minutes, which almost becomes their new formula.
Yep.
Rather than these long, like epic, kind of strewn out, like complex.
Well, this is kind of the beginning of the thrash revival of sorts. I mean, In Flames definitely, and Excretion, a couple of other like war bands, war record bands.
Yeah, Eucharist and some.
They're kind of like channeling a little bit of at least like thrash sensibilities into, not necessarily stuff that would, later on, like Municipal Wastes and that kind of stuff, but pulling more thrash into death metal instead of Old Death and Autopsy and all that kind of stuff that they were doing.
And especially a lot of, and we talked about this way back when you did the Skydancer show and stuff, but a lot of the German stuff,
Teutonic metal, dude.
Yeah, the Creators, the Destructions, the Sodoms, some of that stuff kind of mixed in there. But, I think also, Tampa always bringing kind of some of the punk influence in there, which gave it that shorter, punchier kind of feel, too. Wasn't afraid to be catchy, which it was sort of nice. And so Raped by the Light of Christ sets this kind of thing in motion, and then that's their last record with Peaceville is with Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness.
With Terminal was on Peaceville too.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, my version, of course, is the strange futurist version. Oh yeah, that's right. It is Peaceville.
Yeah.
But this got like kind of weird distribution as well, right? It was better than with Fear, but.
It was just back then. It was just weird because you'd have a company that would pop up and they'd say, "Okay, we're going to license everything from cherry pick Peaceville titles this year." But Peaceville is one of those labels that it was like early on, it was just buying stuff imports, or else they'd like every once in a while you could get stuff in the States. But this is still kind of like coming right out of that time where you'd have to get stuff mail order. You're paying $18-19 for a CD, plus shipping sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
This was like right around the time when like Relapse Mail Order started carrying a lot of this stuff, and it was, I think, might have been the last. Oh, maybe there's 2 more years of their whole of the Nuclear Blast Relapse kind of thing. Yeah, they were like licensing all their stuff stateside too. So it wasn't the internet generation of everybody getting everything whenever they want it kind of deal. So, and
now Terminal Spirit Disease, which comes out in '94. I guess you can look at it as a full length, even though it's really sort of an EP with some live song kind of added on. I mean, it's is it six original songs? Yeah, 6 original songs and then 3 live songs, and the 6 original songs are like under a half hour, so it's not a long record by any means, but
I think those live versions show how great of a live band they were becoming at that point too. Yeah. Which I think led to how tight Slaughter of the Soul is going to be.
Sure. And I think, what was your reaction, because you heard this in proper sequence, when you go from Red in the Sky and With Fear, which are these dense, labyrinthine kind of records, to Terminal Spirit. I mean, was it like a Wolverine Blues kind of shocker?
No,
at all,
not at all. I mean, because at this point there was so much shit coming out in a given year that it wasn't like you're just waiting for the next record to come out. There's so much other stuff that was like fulfilling our needs for all this, getting into whatever other scene. This is around like black metal time too. So all this other shit was kind of occupying the space. It was just like, okay, here's a new At the Gates record. Cool. I don't remember personally having any kind of like reservations about this is like becoming too commercial or something.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not, when we get into the stuff here in a second, when you hear, and most of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with, I would imagine, some of the songs, especially maybe the title track and Forever Blind, which kind of get played quite a bit. It's not like shockingly catchy or shockingly like ballless. It's still like fierce and
oh sure,
it's got like all those elements. But
I mean, every one of their records is a transitional record.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably between this and Slaughter of the Soul is the least jump.
Yeah.
But it's just more of a refinement between that point. But I mean, just like the 80s hardcore punk scene, these bands burned like really fast and hot, and put out maybe 1-2 records and an EP and they're done. And I think just especially these guys are, I don't know, in their early 20s at this point too. He's like, you're trying to figure shit out, and it's just, years go on. Years are much longer than they are now.
Yeah, that's true.
So like all the stuff that you can change musically in a given time, a given year or something, I think is really kind of like, shows on these records. Like they're all, these guys, Catatonic, Paradise Lost, all these guys are going these really weird
leaps and bounds between each.
Yeah, where you're like almost witnessing their maturing as an adult in their music as well. Just like, hey, we're really into this, throw it in, what works, what doesn't.
Kind of reminds me, like the early '90s, like underground death metal, just underground metal scene in general. It sort of reminds me, in a sense, having taught the music history stuff of like, really like 1963, 1967 kind of stuff. Just how quickly like, bands like the Beatles or Bob Dylan or Hendrix or whomever would evolve. And I mean, the Beatles would put out like 2 records in the same year, and one was like, a psychedelic odyssey. All of a sudden it was the evolution was happening so quickly for those bands when they're at such like a young age. And I feel like that was kind of happening with the 90s stuff, metal, and also in a sense, I think with the punk scene in the late 70s, early 80s, like you look at a band like The Clash and how quickly they evolved into doing reggae and, all these other kind of elements into their music. But, I think for me, the band that At the Gates fits alongside, I think the most in hindsight, and I think this record kind of couples with that other band's record that was released around the same time, is Carcass. And, Carcass evolved, you look at like the evolution, they went from Reek to Symphonies is just like huge. Then from Symphonies, Necroticism is pretty gigantic.
Yeah.
And then Necroticism to Heartwork, I mean, there is an evolution there, and Heartwork is like this, melodic death metal sort of masterpiece, and it's released the same year as Terminal Spirit Disease. And I think they're kind of like twin engines of that scene in a weird way.
And then when Swan Song came out, that was the one record that it was divisive, and as a purist, I think that if they would have had that not in their career, they would have been, and still Carcass is still held up in really high esteem, and for sure, they should be. But I think At the Gates is in this special kind of realm where they never put out a stinker. They never put out a record where people are just like, I don't know if this is, even when they put out something more catchy, it was like in the zeitgeist of the time, like this is what we needed. Yeah. Death metal was starting to flounder really bad, and this is what it needed to happen. Yeah. So I can totally, like, if they would have put out another record after Slaughter, I don't think it would have.
Well, metal changed so quickly after 95. 95 is that tip.
96, 97, 98 is a dark, dark time for extreme metal.
Yeah. That's weird. We actually had a lot of requests to do an episode about that.
There was good stuff in it, but you had to
encapsulate what that was, how weird that scene was.
You would have had to be willing to go along for the ride for like the My Dying Brides and Paradise Lost putting out Host, and
you had to branch out from what you had been listening to. You had to go. You had to jump with Opeth. You had to jump with black metal. You had to go. You probably at that point, in order to
black
really,
metal was dead at that point. That was symphonic black metal.
I was going to say you had to jump onto Enthroned Darkness Triumphant and stuff like that, which is not bad records, but you had to go with symphonic, you know, because Burzum was in prison. It was just a weird time. Yeah.
There was always kind of the constant talk of, just talking with other, extreme metal people was like, how much longer can this go? Yeah. And then, and
in hindsight, what's weird for me is I never thought that because I was just getting into it.
So you could go
for
back
me, it was like fruitful. It was endless. But like for you guys, you were like, oh man, has it run its course? Like what's going to happen next?
It was rough. And
Napalm was putting out questionably probably the weakest records of their career. All the
Words from Exit Wounds and Inside the Torn Apart.
It was hard to know what was going to happen with the Morbids. The obituaries were kind of.
And then we had metalcore coming in. Yeah. Which
seemed at the time refreshing, but then quickly ran its course by 2001 or whatever.
Well, becoming really kind of derivative because all they're doing is ripping off Swedish death metal, but putting in brocore riffs too.
Speaking of Terminal Spirit Disease and Slaughter of the Soul, that's the template for metalcore in a sense. That's maybe
Darkest Hour. Their entire career is based on ripping off At the Gates,
and I think that's maybe where I was talking about in part one, where there is that dividing point for At the Gates fans, and maybe it's a little bit of kind of antagonism towards the influence that At the Gates later records had. I think I don't think anybody in their right mind, well, I wouldn't say that. I don't think most rational people would sit down and go, Slaughter of the Soul sucks. There's nothing valuable about Slaughter of the Soul. Like, it's bad, you know. You have to recognize that it's good songwriting, it's catchy, it's punchy. It might not be your thing.
It's what the scene needed.
But you can't dismiss it.
No.
But I think there are people that hold Slaughter of the Soul responsible for what happened after. And it's like, that's kind of unreasonable. I don't think At the Gates was predicting that or wanting that. That's like holding Faith No More and Rage Against the Machine and Helmet responsible for new metal.
And
like
Deftones, yeah.
It's not their it's not their fault what happened, you know. So I mean, I don't know. That's a controversy.
I mean, people always like to have complain about something.
Yeah. Controversies.
And metal people like to complain more than a lot of other people.
Yeah. We're like you know, internet movie bloggers.
When it no longer becomes, you know, this isn't my metal anymore.
Yeah.
Then you either fucking, you know, ball up and like get into something else and go back and discover where the stuff came from, or, you know, I don't know.
I mean, the extreme metal community in some weird ways, like even people like our age or slightly younger, we're almost like sort of like some sort of very jaded in that like ain't it cool news kind of way, where it's just like we can nitpick like anything and just like, you know, destroy it.
There's a couple camps. There's the ones that I think when you hit a certain age and you're still along for the ride with this shit. There's some people, you know, that like, okay, I listen to extreme metal stuff, but now I've got a family and I like whatever's on the radio is fine. You know, Nickelback or Disturbed. That you know, kind of like satiates the hardness that I need in my life. But with like I never foresee a time in my life where I'm not listening to this stuff. At this point, I've been listening to it longer than any. This is probably the longest relationship I've had in my life is with extreme metal.
Yeah, same here.
So like now, you know, if I am disillusioned by a certain scene or whatever, I go back and like, okay, in the last like, you know, 4 or 5 years, like I rediscovered the early 80s hardcore punk scene. Yeah. Like everything that remotely kind of goes back to like influencing metal or just like the history of music in general is interesting to me now. So it's like there's never something, you know, there's never a time where I'm not looking or investigating something or like going back into like, you know, obscure thrash bands and something, you know, the whole Canadian metal series we did. Sure. You know, like that was stuff I was never really privy to as a kid outside of, you know, I heard the name Voivod, but you know, Exciter and, you know, a lot of these other bands, I had no idea.
Like yeah, Sacrifice. And I think the problem I have too, you know, speaking of like this new generation, the new wave of American heavy metal or whatever you want to call it, or whatever this sort of post At the Gates, Shadows Fall kind of stuff sort of created is, you know, like I have trouble accessing some of that newer stuff. And I know there's probably some of those things that are better than others. I think I judge some things just based on the fact that I assume it's going to be part of something I don't like. Yeah. You know, and it strikes me, I'd like to be able to bridge that gap because so many of my students will talk to me about some of that kind of stuff, you know, and like ask me, you know, do you listen to blah, blah, blah? And I'm like,
do you like cattle decapitation? Like, it's kind of derivative.
Or like, I don't know, like Born of Osiris and some of that stuff. It's like, I've never, I assume I think I know what they sound like, and that's enough for me. And maybe I just equate everything back to that one time we saw Suicide Silence open for Carcass. And it's like, you know, like that's what the kids that I teach kind of listen to. And kudos to them, because it's not like mainstream, you know, like they're not listening to like Nickelback. So like on some level, I'm totally like legit. I wonder if like the generation above us was looking at us when we were listening to like, you know, late, you know, Dimmu Borgir and going like, what the fuck are you listening to Dimmu Borgir for? You should be listening to like old Autopsy records.
Well, I think Dimmu Borgir might be a different case, but if you go back and this like death metal in the late 80s, early 90s was not derivative of anything else. It didn't sound like anything else.
That's true. They had nothing to like copy because it was like kind of still
and black metal, you know, okay, Bathory did some of this stuff, but this did not sound like anything else we'd ever heard before. I don't know when that next big like shift is going to be in metal, like, you know, like the Converge, the post whatever, post death metal, post punk, weird, you know, combine like bands like, you know, Black Breath, I always fucking forget that. I always think it's Death Breath. Like Black Breath and Converge and, Coalesce, and some of these bands they're doing something that doesn't really sound like anything else, but what's that next thing going to be? The derivative stuff is the stuff that I don't have the time. I'm getting older. I don't have the time to waste my time just seeing if this has any relevance anymore.
I know. And that's where it's sad for me, because I love to have that connect with my students, to be able to have like those common conversations, because I wonder, like, if I have the attitude that where I always kind of talk to them about this stuff that's like, I guess, derivative, if I kind of go to them like, well, that doesn't have value, like, you should listen to this. Like, am I sounding like a 30-year-old talking to a 16-year-old the way I would have thought of it back when I was 16, where if I went into New Moon Records and was like, yeah, man, I'm really pumped to hear, Slayer, and they're like, Slayer's cool, but like, you should listen to Deep Purple. And at the time, I'd probably been like, fuck you, like, Deep Purple, that's... I heard that on fucking classic rock. I don't want to hear, But yeah, at the same time, Nick, now I understand, like, both of those bands are awesome in their own right. But like, at the time, it just sounded like some old person telling me, you should go back and fuck Born of Osiris. You should be listening to Carcass, Heartwork.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, who the fuck's Carcass? Because they broke up in '95. So like, they're not even when they're born. So like, I get it. Like, I get why those kids want their own stuff, but it doesn't mean that I'm interested in it. But yet, I'd love to like be able to have a conversation.
I think the whole thing's it's a lifelong, and you've got people that are passive music fans and people that are engaged music fans. Yeah. And it's a lifelong thing that, back in the day, I didn't, like in the early 90s, I did not give a shit about anything else except for death metal, because that was what I discovered. Yeah. And it was this underground
and that's why I feel some of my students they're passionate about Suicide Silence and Born of Osiris and some of that stuff, because that's what they discovered when they were 14. And so I relate to that, but I don't. Like, I don't relate to those bands, but I get the experience of them feeling empowered.
I think Jeff Wagner said it the best. When people approach you that kind of stuff, you just say, I don't know how to like that.
Yeah, I don't know how to like that yet.
Well, don't put the yet on there.
Yeah.
Because it's a dismissive statement, but it also has an air of respect to it that I think kids can.
I haven't figured out how.
But I think if kids can even think about broaching that subject with you, there's already some kind of like respect there.
Sure, and they're going to know that I'm legitimately
of kids that are going to be like, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. Maybe I should check this stuff out. Yeah, and it's just it's whatever your kind of.
But I see a lot of that emerge post Slaughter of the Soul at the Gates. It's like that's like a dividing line, and stuff. So, but anyways, we tangent, but I think it's a cool conversation, one worth having. And I think At the Gates spurs that sometimes, because they do create these bastard children in the 2000s that some people are still angry about.
And if any of these bands get you to go back and listen to the source material, more
you hope that like at a certain point some of those bands like speak about this and say, hey, go check this out.
A band that came out of that kind of scene, Black Dahlia Murder, which I know Trevor, the singer in the band, he is one of the biggest proponents of death metal out there, but they have a younger demographic that is definitely not my scene, but they're constantly kind of like spouting this is what you need to check out. Yeah. This is where it all came from.
And more power to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if bands that we listen to hadn't have done that about the old stuff, we might not be discovering like early, Discharge and some of that.
I mean, that's how like Bolthrower talked about, like we wouldn't be around without Discharge, Concrete Socks, blah, blah, blah. I went back and listened to those bands. Sure. I don't necessarily understand this, but I like, if Bolthrower likes it, there's got to be something there. Yeah,
for sure. So, but let's get into some of this melodic, catchy, punchy stuff that we were kind of talking about here. We've got Terminal Spirit Disease, Forever Blind, and The Fevered Circle from the Terminal Spirit Disease record. Then from that record, we have a live version of The Beautiful Wound, which was actually from the Purgatory Unleashed record that we kind of talked about. Then we're going to close with something kind of fun that some of you probably have heard, and if you haven't, you'll enjoy it, and we'll talk about it.
Can you beautiful wood.
Amazing, open your
That was Captor of Sin, The Beautiful Wound Live, The Fevered Circle, Forever Blind, and Terminal Spirit Disease. And that last song, maybe people have heard it before. It's kind of a famous little ditty from a band called Slayer.
All the little girls like to spread the legs in the night. This is Captor of Sin.
This is Captor of Sin. And that comes from the Slaytanic Slaughter, right? Is that what it was called? What was it? Those two collections.
Yeah, I've got it. It's actually on
oh my gosh,
the Curse the Tour thing as well.
Drive me nuts. It's the
Slaytanic Slaughter thing that Black Sun Records put out, right?
Yeah. There's Volume 1 and Volume 2. That was on Volume 1.
Yeah.
And not the first time, and we'll talk more about Captor of Sin in a second, but not the first time At the Gates had done a epic tribute to a big thrash band, because they actually went undercover as Snot Rocket.
Oh, that's right.
For the Metal Militia, which was the Metallica tribute, which had like In Flames and Ceremonial Oath and
which there's some weird thing like within I don't know, it might have been some kind of like contract thing to where they couldn't record it
at the gates
as At the Gates. So like, we're Snot Rocket. It was Escape, wasn't it?
Yeah. They do Escape from Ride the Lightning.
When they ended up doing a No Security cover as well later on too, but their covers were quite varied.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to another cover a little bit later, but Captor of Sin is, we tend to shy away from covers because typically they don't hold a candle to either the originals, or they're not terribly relevant to like the trajectory of like a band. But I think
this song like sums up At the Gates altogether.
Yeah,
I mean, if you can take a Slayer song like Captor of Sin and make it more
fierce, more ferocious,
just like this song is just explosive all the way through.
Yeah, visceral.
Like, it's like they're coming off the rails, and the whole time they're doing it's like they're on the verge of just fucking falling flat.
Yeah,
there's so much energy in it.
And I've told Mark that the part I used to listen to this on headphones when I was doing construction all the time. Like I have these weird like visions back to like being like up on the roof alone, like cleaning and like listening to this stuff on like Walkman, or Discman or something. And in particular, the part of that song that always would get me is the bends and the solo, which they play the solos fairly, true to what King and Hanneman kind of did, but like almost like an overdrive.
Yeah.
And it's the way that like there's a difference in how Araya's vocals come out of the chorus with the lead still sort of like
resonating a little bit,
resonating and bending compared to what Tampa does. And Tampa's he's a different beast altogether, and so it's a different level of ferociousness that still hits me pretty hard.
Well, I think this song though, I mean, it's similarly to how My Friend in Misery is like a perfect fit for Dark Tranquility.
Yeah, personality wise,
this like totally sums up the kind of personality of the band.
It has like lightning in a bottle. I mean, they're just like unhinged. I mean, before we move on to, I guess, Slaughter the Soul, is there, any particular, I guess, memories or highlights or things from Terminal Spirit Disease that sort of jump out to you amongst some of the songs?
I mean, the live songs were the ones that were always kind of like the cherries on that one for us. But, just to hear, pre-YouTube and having a ton of interviews, like hearing a little bit of the personality of the band come through live, I think was always kind of interesting.
And I like that they're able to throw, some different things in there. Like, like the Fevered Circle has some kind of like doomy parts to it, which is kind of cool. And, a song like Forever Blind is pretty predictable where Slaughter of the Soul is going to go, I think. Plus you get one of something that they do on this record and Slaughter of the Soul, which are the really cool instrumentals, which is track 3 on there. Is it And the World Returned?
And the World Returned.
And then, Into the Dead Sky on Slaughter of the Soul. And I always like those, partially because one of the problems you have in high school, if you're dating normal people, is trying to make relevant to these females that there is something valuable and beautiful about metal.
Yeah, which now is not a problem at all.
No, it's not
the girls are so young that I have a problem associating with people that are that young.
Yeah. But And the World Returned and Into the Dead Sky was like a cool, unique moment to be like, hey, look, here's a band like using like violins and cellos and doing this like beautiful, dark kind of landscape of the, it was like a dark, beautiful kind of mixture. I mean, it was like what Dark Tranquility were doing and Opeth and a lot of these other Swedish bands, and this sort of fit right in line with that. And so I always got my kicks on those two songs, or like putting them on mixed CDs or mixtapes or whatever.
Yeah,
they fit pretty well.
And actually, these three All Life Ends, The Burning Darkness, and Kingdom Gone on the live tracks, they were so like affected me so, or I'm so used to hearing that version if I hear the album version, I always think there's going to be like the but only me, the burning darkness.
Yeah.
They just become synonymous with those songs. Like there's such like perfect interpretations of those of that time of the band.
Yeah.
That's almost like the penultimate version of those songs for me.
And then Slaughter of the Soul.
And it happened.
1995. What was this? What was it? Was this voted the greatest death metal record of all time? I can't remember. I mean, different polls have sort of thrown different things. It's in there. It's in the conversation. Maybe you could argue it's the most important Swedish death metal record alongside Left Hand Path. I mean, there's a lot of different debates you could kind of have, but it certainly has had an impact.
Yes.
It's a nice swan song, as you said. Perfect way to go out, kind of right on top. For a band.
Sure.
To
I mean, it was similar to like how Sepultura Rise was like. If you liked any kind of remotely hard music, you had that record. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how this record was too.
Yeah, it was a gateway drug for a lot of people. I remember what was so odd about this was the first record that, outside of my little circle of friends that were fairly getting tuned into the European metal scene, this seemed to be kind of the first European metal record outside of, I guess, the British earache stuff, which was, kind of, I don't want to say mainstream, but it had some access points because of Columbia and the Columbia earache deal.
Yeah.
This seemed to be a record that I had conversations with people at concerts about in the mid-90s who I didn't really know that well, who would openly talk about at the gates. It was almost like their first awareness that there was an entire metal scene happening outside of America and England.
Yeah.
Or Brazil, Sepultura or whatever. But, and that was strange to me because I was like, oh, really? You didn't know that there was all these Swedish and Norwegian bands and, Danish bands and doing this. And to them, it was like really eye-opening that there was this whole other thing happening on the other side of the planet.
Well, if you look at like as far as like mainstream accessibility or just mainstream exposure, Morbid Angel, and then it jumps right to At the Gates.
Yeah.
I think we're two of the bands that were
Cannibal Corpse with
Sure.
With the Ace Ventura kind of, I mean, but but I think I know what you're saying.
But as far as Cannibal Corpse
but Covenant was the first record
they were
on
notorious.
a major label.
Yeah, but Morbid Angel, I mean, I guess all those three of those bands had enough media exposure to where it was just like uncompromising to the original ethos of what death metal was. And then yet they can still have that kind of because Cannibal Corpse stuff mostly came out from controversy. Yeah. From, Butchered at Birth and Eaten Back to Life that had censored covers. Yeah. They're in all kinds of news reports and shit. Morbid Angel, I guess to a lesser degree, but still having that giant deal.
Yeah.
And then seeing that as a video, this is probably one of the earlier things you saw on Headbangers Ball.
Absolutely.
And what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Yeah,
and you can go to almost any record store and buy this too. Yeah. It's like, wow.
Well, there's something kind of dangerous about pulling those tapes off, and they were tapes, and tapes and CDs, I guess, and this staring at the whatever the satanic book was on the cover of Covenant.
It's looking back at it's pretty pedestrian as far ridiculous. As metal covers go,
but in an atmospheric sense, if all you're exposed to is you saw this video for Rapture and God of Emptiness late at night on Headbangers Ball, you were 14, a little uneasy. You didn't know if you really should have been seeing those videos.
Oh, sure. And then the riffs from Morbid Angel at that point were you never heard shit. The riffs themselves, even if you had no context of demonic imagery or satanic shit, we're just this is just fucking scary as it is.
Yeah, it was probably the way people heard Hendrix the first time. It was just it melted your brain with what they were trying to do, and that's Trey's whole approach in a sense. But
it was.
Yeah. But Slaughter was a whole other beast. It was Heartwork Part 2. Because Heartwork, kind of pushed the door open to melodic metal in a mainstream sense. I mean, you saw Heartwork videos on Headbangers. I don't really remember seeing the Blinded by Fear video on Headbangers so much because I think Headbangers was done by 95, so you didn't really access point it. But I mean, I've seen it since. But it was, this thing was everywhere. in a weird way. And
I mean, I think it had the same kind of enthusiasm around it that, because everybody was like really into Heartwork when that came out, for sure. It had a lot of like crossover appeal, but At the Gates almost had that like kind of like camaraderie feel that thrash metal had too, like where people would like, even if you didn't know you'd throw arms around them and like start headbanging to that song, and like you would with an Exodus or a Metallica record or something. And there's not a whole lot of like really extreme metal bands I think that have ever really hit that kind of nerve with people.
So I guess my question is, and it's always bantered around, is this a thrash record or a death metal record? Because
it's a death metal record, but I think it's probably like the perfect marriage of the two, where they each have their own identity still exposed, where it's not just purely referential to the other. It's like taking something they loved as kids, merging it with something a scene they helped create, and then bring something else out of it. It's not the like a band like Toxic Holocaust, who is very speed metal influence from the 80s, but not really bringing anything else, which is fine. I love that band, but I think with Slaughter the Soul, those were two scenes that kind of like came together perfect in that record, and I don't know if that really has ever done so since.
And I think for me, I see it in the same light that is a perfect marriage between those two scenes. It's as if Rain and Blood was like the perfect marriage between thrash and extreme metal. Like, I mean, it was like on the threshold really of like, I mean, that was a record that Obituary, Morbid Angel, Death, everyone was paying attention to, even though Slayer wasn't extreme metal yet. Their imagery,
all that were taken was vocals.
I mean, it was just right there. And I see this in the same light, that it's that mergence between thrash and death metal, but it appealed to both camps on a pretty profound level. And I guess Rain and Blood's a good way to sort of describe this record, because I think in the same way, all of these songs are very short and punchy and samey in a way.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of like, there's sort of like a timbre or a tone to the whole record, where very few of the songs jump out immediately to you. But it's a great headphone record, when you put like the headphones.
It's like a great like repeat listen record, like Rain and Blood is.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's moments in each song, and it might be a 2-second moment, but it's like there's a really weird like shift in tone, or like the drums will change for 1 second, and it's like or those even, moments you hook onto, and you're just like, yeah, motherfucker.
Yeah, having like a cassette tape version of Rain and Blood, and then getting the CD version, I was like, that's where that song begins?
Yeah.
Like that kind of shit.
Yeah. It was kind of weird. And a song like Unto Others in Need, which we'll be listening to, I remember like Need's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. Like there's nothing to it, but there's something about like the little beginning intro where Adrian Ruslanison like does like this weird delay before he like jumps in at like the 45-second mark. It's almost like he gets lazy for a second, but he's doing that completely on purpose. Like he slows
like
down
catching up
and then jumps it back into something, and it kills me every time. Like fuck yeah, like, but it's like so simple, and most people on first or even 10th listen probably don't hear that or give a shit about it. But it's that part that appeals to me about Rain and Blood. It's that part that appeals to me about Slaughter of the Soul, is the littler moments, the way that the sort of guitar solo bubbles up out of like Slaughter of the Soul and Cold. Like it just sort of like bubbles, it's effervescent, like it just it's really simple. There's nothing like dynamic about it. But
I think I don't know how many of the solos that Martin Larson actually performed. I think it's mostly was Anders.
Is Anders a Jonas?
Yeah, it's Jonas is the bass player. He's got a very similar, like the Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman vibe, where if you're really, really schooled in Slayer, you can tell the difference.
Yeah.
But they never really go out on a limb and do something really weird for a solo. Like they've got their own solo approach, and really it doesn't matter the notes they hit. It's like the progression of it. And I think that the At the Gates has a similar kind of vibe, where there's a consistency of the solos, except the Andy LaRocque solo is a little bit different in it. But it's such a consistency similar to Slayer that you know what to expect, but you're not like disappointed when you hear it. Kind of thing.
And then when they do something which in hindsight isn't really that dynamic, but like for the record super dynamic, like Under a Serpent Sun has that like middle section that's like, so it's almost like the beginning of Rain and Blood, the song. Like, oh, like this is so different. But yet it's really not. But it's like it allows itself to like slow down or something, almost like the intro to like Jesus Saves, where like that doesn't sound like any other part in the record, and it's only for like 40 seconds, but like that 40 seconds in the block of a 29-minute record just grabs you, because you're like, oh, this is really different, but it's really not, you know. But like that moment on Under a Serpent Sun does it for me, you know, like in the middle, like it's like really melodic, but it's not really that melodic, you know. It's not like
in the context or something, in the context of the record it is. And
then Blinded by Fear, which is such a great song, but yet it's really not. Like, it's really pretty pedestrian for that whole record in hindsight, but yet it's the song that kind of was their hit song for a while off of it, you know. And so I'm still endeared to it because it's like that first At the Gate song I ever heard, you know, and stuff. So, but it's, you know, it's a cool record. I'm sure everyone has their favorites on it. I'm sure there's some people that are sick to death of this record and never want to hear it again. There's some people that are still like...
See, the nice thing is that they put out the Purgatory Unleashed record that gives you a different version of it to hear, so it's not the same thing. But I would also suggest people go out and get... I have 3 versions of Slaughter of the Soul. I have the original, I have the reissue that has a CD-ROM on it, and then I have the reissue with the DVD.
The DVD documentary.
And the documentary... You know, if you actually like sitting down and like seeing, I really like seeing, especially like Morbid Angel did this recently
with the studio stuff.
Yeah, like seeing the studio shit, how it actually works.
Yeah,
I'm sure you can find it on YouTube as well. But that's definitely something to check out. That's the thing that Eric's got me multiple times on. Is I've got, I think, 4 versions of Necroticism.
Necroticism.
And Force of Equilibrium. I've got 3 versions of that as well. So it's like, if you give me a little bit of, you know, this extra behind the scenes stuff.
We're history buffs, man.
Yeah.
So we're just looking for history. But, so, you know, Slaughter of the Soul, here we go. You know, we decided, as Mark said, to throw a couple Purgatory Unleashed versions on there. Maybe some of you guys have Purgatory Unleashed, maybe you don't. So it might be kind of fun for you to hear some different versions.
It's a live record that I would actually buy, even though I got it for free. But the bass tone on it is fantastic. I fucking love it.
And just they're tight, you know. Even the older songs sound really good, as I'm sure you heard on, you know, with Kingdom Gone and Raped by the Light of Christ. I mean, these are good tunes. We're gonna start with a live version of Slaughter of the Soul, the title track, then 2 studio, so you can hear kind of the studio sound of it. And this is alongside Terminal Spirit Disease, both recorded with in Studio Friedman, which Anders Friedman, right? Is that his name? Who's the...
No, it's
not Anders Friedman. The hell? Why am I drawing a blank on this guy? Is it Frederick Norman?
No, Frederick
Norman's from Catatonia. I can't think what the hell his name is. Of course, I'm looking right now.
And so
Frederick Nordstrom.
Okay.
There you go.
I mean, it's Frederick something.
And then Kristen Wallen does the cover.
Necrolord.
Necrolord. I was calling Tampa Necrolord, but he's Goat. He's Goat Lord, isn't he?
No, Goat Lord's a Darkthrone record.
What the fuck is his nickname?
I have to look it up on Metallica.
Shit, I know I've got the Grotesque CD. I'll look in a second. But we got Under the Serpent Sun and Unto Others studio versions of those 2 songs. A live version of Need, which then kind of transitions into a live version of the aforementioned Blinded by Fear. So enjoy, and we'll find out who Tampa's underground name is when we come back.
Open a
need.
With your kids of steel, and my
Blinded by Fear and Need from the live Purgatory Unleashed, then Unto Others and Under a Serpent Sun from Slaughter the Soul. And then we started off with a live version of Slaughter the Soul from Purgatory Unleashed. Mm-hmm. And here we go. We made it. Made it through the end. And this is a band that obviously went out on top, as we kind of talked about. But luckily for us, reformed to do some live records, live shows, and
for all those all those bands and kids that they influenced that never got to see them back in the day. Well, I unfortunately missed them back in the day as well, but I think it was worth the wait. Those cool. Live shows were great, and they didn't seem to be a false reunion, where it was just kind of in it for only the money. They seemed to enjoy themselves. And I think they're in it for the right reasons. They're not putting it like. Similar like to what Carcass did is it's not like, okay, we're going to get back together and put out a lackluster, record. Yeah. We're just going to do this, play the songs that you guys want to hear. And it's kind of a testament to the band, Yeah. This is all it is. It's not going to be anything else. I mean, because being away for, 13, 14 years, a lot's changed. And all these guys have clearly stayed involved in the scene, many of which, these guys went on for, to be with the Haunted and, Adrian plays with Paradise Lost now.
Paradise Lost, Valenfire, he played on, right?
Played with Cradle of Filth. Tampa's been in Night Rage, Lockup, The Crown.
Lockup. I mean, Great Deceiver, all kinds of stuff.
Skid System. I mean, it's fucking goes on and on.
Yeah, the Bueller Brothers. Yeah, Bueller Brothers did, basically been with the Haunted.
Well, and one of them, which, forgive me for my ignorance, but I don't know, they're identical twins. So there's one of them that's been doing a bunch of documentaries as well.
And he's the one that filmed the
Flames in the End. He also did the one for Dark Tranquility, which is interesting, but
not as good
sound design sucks ass. You can hear if you like hearing gravel.
The gravel walking. That's all I remember from it. It's pretty funny. So they're still around. They're obviously relevant.
And then there's Martin.
Yeah. Who went to Wendy's with us. I like Martin. He's a nice guy.
I think he's like in some like rock band or something now.
He seemed probably the most down to earth of all the guys, kind of the most mellow.
It was cool seeing like all these other guys that have been touring consistently for 12 years or whatever it's been since they toured. He had a little bit of, you could see he had a little bit of apprehension when he played. Like this was pushing him a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was a fucking great show. I think without him it wouldn't have been as satisfying too.
Yeah.
But
it'd been cool to. I wonder how hard it would have been to maybe pull Elf out for a couple of songs, maybe one, maybe at Vakken or something. If they,
yeah.
I'm sure the conversation happened.
I don't know if he plays in some fucking goofy ass band that was on. I don't even remember what label it is. I just remember the cover was awful. It was like, I think it was a picture of him. And he's kind of tattooed up, and he's got like some weird like gun for an arm thing. It looked fucking retarded. I have a feeling it's like pseudo-industrial or something.
Okay, perfect.
I mean, if you haven't played that stuff in a long time, it's probably difficult to pick back up. And
that a lot of that stuff that he wrote was so complex that it's not. You probably have to be pretty well practiced. But as their first, I guess, epic end of tour was the Curse to Tour with Napalm Death here in the States, and that was back in the
Dissection as well, wasn't it?
Not with me. I know they did do one leg of it Dissection, them, and Morbid.
I don't know if it's that. I know it was Dissection I thought it was Dissection at the Gates and Napalm.
Yeah, unfortunately I didn't get to see the Dissection part of it because that would have been in hindsight kind of unimaginable.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, got to see them live in Grand Rapids, and they gave us copies of this CD, this little slimline thing called The Curse to Tour, which had 4 songs from Napalm Death and 4 songs from At the Gates. And I think for those of you that have heard that, one of the highlights, of course, was their cover of an Australian band that we're just kind of looking up a little bit, called Slaughterlord, with a song called Legion. And it was just...
Not the Dennis Quaid movie.
No. And it was a demo from their Taste of Blood demo from 1986, and we were kind of discussing there really wasn't a whole lot going on in Australia from a metal point of view. They had the rock stuff with the New Christ and whatnot, but
AC/DC and all
Nick
that.
Cave,
but, yeah.
Well, he was in England, but he came from Australia. But so I mean, this is kind of a bonus, and if you've never heard this, I can imagine that they're probably I want to say a derivative band. But the Exodus Slayer creator, the heavier side of thrash, you can kind of hear that element inside of Legion, but it fit the style of At the Gates at this point in their career, because that's what they were really doing. They're kind of doing this death metal hybrid of thrash.
Well, if you heard this without knowing it, I mean, the first time I heard it, I was like, "What? That's just another At the Gates
song. Awesome song."
And then look at the little promo thing.
And the breakdown in the middle
wow, sweet.
is killer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the highlight of the song is the whole middle section of the song with the sort of drum stop-start interplay, and you know, it's a great way to go out for sure. And just like Captor of Sin, it says a lot about a band when you can do a cover and turn it into a byproduct of everything you are, without losing any of the integrity, I think, of the original, but or selling out any of the integrity of who you are as a band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, making it your own.
It is At the Gates. You know, like I hear the song, I don't think it's a cover. It's just At the Gates. You know, and it's kind of a neat way to sort of go out. Any final thoughts from on the legacy? Anything?
All life ends, dude.
All life ends. Yes, it does. All life ends. And in a way, I think you're right. I think it's good that we don't see another record from these guys. As much as there's that kind of irrational part of me that would love to know what a new Carcass record or new At the Gates record might sound like. We get answers from bands like Morbid Angel sometimes, and it's not always the answer we want or we're looking for. Yeah. You know, and so
I think it's good when bands know when their end time is, because given Carcass's output lately from the guys in the bands, it's not going to be what we want.
Yeah,
and I think they understand that. Okay, this was that era.
But they're not interested in that intensity.
If you want to hear another At the Gates record, listen to the second and third, like Haunted Made Me Do It and One Kill Wonder. That's what it would be.
Yeah,
it's not going to be, and then go listen to like the Crowned in Terror.
Yep.
You get the ferocity and the kind of like rumblings of what happened, but where the band would have went, maybe.
Yeah. Sure. I think that's that's an appropriate way of sort of saying it. So we'll close things out here, and hopefully you enjoyed our rants and ravings on At the Gates over the last couple episodes. Let us know what you thought. requiempodcast@gmail.com, or check us out on iTunes. Leave a review, star rating, that kind of thing. If you're interested in being an executive producer, please let us know. There's if you go to requiempodcast.com, there's links to do that.
And we also have merchandise still. We just sold a coffee mug and a t-shirt.
Did we? Cool.
Recently, and I think got $4 from it. But
nice.
Every little bit helps, and I appreciate anybody that wants to, keep one of those coffee mugs in your cubicle or sport the t-shirt in response, kind of support the show.
Yeah, and Mark's got a lot of cool artwork and things like that. You can link to get some of the stuff that he's done for his freelance and for Decibel and different kind of things like that. So lots of good things there. Get some early Christmas presents or Mother's Day gifts now. Start thinking.
Get birthday presents,
yeah,
whatever it might be. Sure. Is Lent coming up? Maybe Lent already happened. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it did.
I grew up Catholic, but I no longer follow that dogma. So
yeah,
a good Lent gift, maybe a Good Friday gift. I'm not sure.
What's the end of Lent? Is there some giant celebration? Or is that Easter, Good Friday?
I think it goes Ash Wednesday, Lent, Good Friday, Easter.
Yeah,
right. The only reason I remember
it's like a week
because I would get
of ass kicking.
I would get a day off of
zombie
school.
Ritual stuff.
Yeah.
So
somebody rolled open the boulder and Jesus came crawling out.
Yes, of course he did.
Yeah, somebody stole his body.
And on that note,
King of Kings, my ass.
We have Legion to sort of go out with an appropriate kind of song. So enjoy this, especially if you haven't heard it before. If you have, enjoy it again. So for At the Gates and Legion from the Curse to Tour CD, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.